A Spanish fisherman pulls something from the water on the morning of the 30th of April, 1943. It's a body, British military uniform, sodden and heavy, a briefcase chained to the wrist. The fisherman alerts Spanish soldiers near Huelva, and within hours the body is in the hands of local authorities. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Found floating in the sea. Documents inside the briefcase carry the highest classification markings. Within 9 days, German intelligence in Spain photographs every page. The letters detail Allied invasion plans for the Mediterranean. Greece is the primary target, Sardinia as well. Sicily is mentioned only as a diversion, a feint to draw German attention away from the real assault. In Berlin, the intelligence makes its way up the chain. It reaches Hitler himself, and he believes it. But Major William Martin never existed. The body was real, the man was not. 3 months earlier, in a freezing warehouse near King's Cross Station in London, authorities found a man slumped against a wall. He was still alive, but barely conscious. Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh vagrant in his early 30s, homeless and friendless. He'd eaten bread smeared with rat poison, likely because he was starving and didn't realize what the paste was meant for. 2 days later, his liver failed. He died at St. Pancras Hospital on the 24th of January 1943. No family came forward, no one claimed the body. Within hours, a phone call reached Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague at the Naval Intelligence Division. They had been searching for months. Montague needed a corpse. Young, male, recently deceased, and crucially, with no relatives who would ask questions. The coroner, Bentley Purchase, had promised to keep watch. Michael's body was exactly what they needed. But there was a problem. The rat poison had left traces in the tissue, yellowing the skin. If a Spanish doctor conducted a thorough autopsy, the deception could collapse before it began. Montague consulted with Bernard Spilsbury, one of Britain's leading pathologists. Spilsbury's assessment was blunt but workable. The phosphorus poisoning could be mistaken for decomposition after several days in seawater. The body might pass inspection, but only if the Spanish examiner wasn't too thorough and didn't look too closely. It was a gamble. Purchase quietly falsified the death certificate, stating that Michael had died and been buried abroad. The body was transferred to British intelligence and placed in cold storage. They had 3 months before decomposition made it useless. The clock started. The idea itself had been floating around British intelligence since 1939. Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, had circulated a memo comparing wartime deception to fly fishing. The Trout Memo, it was called. 54 different schemes for deceiving the enemy. Most were abstract, theoretical. Number 28 suggested planting false documents on a corpse that would wash ashore in enemy territory. The memo carried Godfrey's name, but the writing style suggested his assistant had drafted it. That assistant was Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming, who would later create James Bond. The idea was rejected multiple times. Too complex, too many variables, too easy for the enemy to see through. But by late 1942, the strategic situation had changed. The Allies had secured North Africa, and the next target was obvious: Sicily. It was the closest point to mainland Europe from North Africa, well within range of Allied air support, dotted with airfields that could be used for the invasion of Italy. The Germans knew it, everyone knew it. Invading the obvious target meant heavy casualties, prolonged fighting, and the risk of catastrophic failure if the Germans reinforced their defenses. British intelligence needed misdirection. Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, assigned to MI5, revived the corps plan in October 1942 under the codename Trojan Horse. His version involved dropping a body from an aircraft into the sea off the Spanish coast. The 20 Committee, which oversaw British double agents and deception operations, rejected it again but saw potential. John Masterman, the committee chairman, assigned Ewan Montague to work with Cholmondeley and refine the concept. Montague, a peacetime barrister and King's Counsel, had been running counter-espionage operations for naval intelligence. He was meticulous, detail-oriented, and understood how to construct a believable lie. Together, they reworked the plan. The body wouldn't be dropped from a plane. It would be released from a submarine close enough to shore that currents would carry it to the beach. Spain was officially neutral, but many officials in Franco's government were pro-German. There was even a known German intelligence agent, Adolf Kloss, operating in Huelva. If the body washed ashore there, with classified documents, the Spanish would almost certainly pass the information to Berlin. Montagu selected the codename Mincemeat from a list of available operation names. The plan moved forward. Creating a dead officer who could fool German intelligence required an obsessive level of detail. The corpse had to have a name, a rank, a past, a personality. Montagu and Cholmondeley named him William Martin. The surname was deliberately common. There were multiple officers named Martin in the Royal Marines, making it harder for the Germans to verify or disprove his existence. His rank was captain, acting major, assigned to Combined Operations Headquarters. That gave him a plausible reason to be carrying sensitive documents between senior officers. But a name and rank weren't enough. The Germans would examine everything. If the body looked staged, the entire operation would collapse. So the intelligence team created what Montagu called pocket litter, the small personal items that make a person real. Ticket stubs from a London theater dated April 22nd, suggesting Martin had been in London just days before his supposed death, a receipt for an engagement ring purchased from a London jeweler, an angry letter from his bank about an overdraft, a letter from his father, affectionate but slightly formal, mentioning family matters, and a photograph of his fiancée, a woman named Pam. The photograph was real. It showed MI5 clerk Jean Leslie, young and attractive, who had volunteered the image for the operation. On the back, someone had written in feminine handwriting, "Till death do us part, your loving Pam." There were also love letters, written by Hester Leggett, an MI5 secretary who was unmarried and in her 60s. She crafted letters that were intimate but not explicit, the kind of correspondence an engaged couple might exchange. But there was a technical problem that nearly derailed everything. They needed an identity card with Martin's photograph. You can't photograph a corpse and make it look alive. No matter how they tried, the pictures looked like exactly what they were, a dead man. Montagu found another officer, Ronnie Reed, who bore a resemblance to Michael's body. Reed's photograph was used for the identity card. Every piece of pocket litter was carefully aged, handled, made to look worn. The documents had to survive immersion in seawater but still be readable when recovered. The Germans had to believe that Major Martin was real. The heart of the deception was the correspondence itself, the classified letters that would mislead German command. Montagu couldn't just forge something crude. It had to come from the highest levels, written in the language and tone that senior British officers actually used. The main letter was composed by Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Sir Harold Alexander, who commanded Allied forces in North Africa. Nye wrote the letter himself, opening with a casual, "My dear Alex," before moving into sensitive material. He discussed the appointment of a new commander for the Guards Brigade, mentioned issues with U.S. service medals for British personnel, and then, almost in passing, referenced the upcoming invasion. The Allies would target Greece, codenamed Husky in the letter, though the real Operation Husky was actually Sicily. Sardinia was mentioned as a secondary target. Sicily would be used as a cover, a diversionary feint to make the Germans think the Allies were going after the obvious target. The genius of the letter was that it didn't scream classified intelligence. It read like routine correspondence between officers who knew each other, discussing operational details alongside mundane administrative matters. A second letter from Admiral Louis Mountbatten introduced Major Martin as the courier, a capable officer being sent to North Africa with the documents. Both letters were placed inside a briefcase, which would be chained to Martin's wrist. The chain was important. If the briefcase was simply carried, the Spanish might assume it had been lost separately. Chaining it to the body suggested Martin had been guarding these documents even as his plane went down, that he died trying to protect them. But the technical challenge remained. Glyndwr Michael's body had been in cold storage for weeks. It couldn't be frozen, because ice crystals in the tissue would be detectable and inconsistent with drowning. The corpse was kept refrigerated, slowing decomposition but not stopping it. The pathologist Bernard Spilsbury had warned them, 3 months maximum. After that, the body would be too deteriorated to pass as a recent drowning victim. They were running out of time. On the 17th of April, 1943, Montague and Cholmondeley loaded the body into a van and drove north to Scotland. Michael's corpse was dressed in the full uniform of a Royal Marines officer, complete with trench coat and boots. The pocket litter was distributed carefully. Wallet, keys, identity card, letters, receipts, ticket stubs, everything positioned as it would naturally sit on a living man. The briefcase with the classified letters was attached to his belt with a leather-covered chain. The body was placed inside a specially designed steel canister, packed with dry ice to slow further decomposition during transport. On April 19th, the canister was loaded aboard HMS Seraph, a British submarine operating out of Holy Loch, Scotland. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Bill Jewell, had been briefed but told very little. He didn't know the full scope of the operation, only that he was to transport a body and release it at specific coordinates off the Spanish coast. The Seraph set course for the southwestern coast of Spain. The journey took 10 days. Inside the canister, Glyndwart Michael's body continued its slow decay. On the morning of April 30th, the submarine surfaced approximately 1 mile offshore from Huelva. Jewell ordered all crew below deck except the officers. The canister was brought up, opened carefully. The smell would have been unmistakable. The body was wrapped in a life jacket to ensure it would float and be visible. At 4:30 a.m., the officers lowered Michael's corpse into the water. Jewell read Psalm 39 aloud, a brief acknowledgement of the man who had become someone else. Then, the submarine's engines were reversed to full power. The wash from the propellers pushed the body toward shore into the current that would carry it the rest of the way. The officers sent a coded message back to London. Mincemeat complete. But they still had to dispose of the canister. They moved 12 miles offshore, pushed the empty container into the sea, and tried to sink it with machine gun fire. The insulation trapped air. The canister floated. They riddled it with cannon fire. It still floated. Finally, they used plastic explosives to destroy it. The submarine continued on to Gibraltar. Back in London, Montague and Cholmondeley waited. There was nothing more they could do. The body was discovered around 9:30 that morning by a sardine fisherman named Jose Antonio Rey Maria. He pulled it aboard his boat and brought it to the port authorities in Huelva. Spanish naval officers took custody. The briefcase was still chained to the wrist. An autopsy was conducted on May 1st, with the British Vice Consul Francis Haselden present. Haselden, who was in on the operation, played his role carefully. He urged the Spanish doctor to conclude the examination quickly, citing the heat and the condition of the corpse. The doctor complied. Cause of death was listed as asphyxiation through immersion in the sea combined with hypothermia, drowning. No mention of phosphorus or rat poison. The Spanish military retained the briefcase. For the British, this was the critical phase. If they appeared too eager to get the documents back, the Spanish might become suspicious and simply return everything immediately. But if they didn't push at all, the Spanish might not realize the documents were important. Montague and the British consulate in Spain began sending urgent but carefully worded requests. They needed the briefcase returned. It contained highly sensitive material. The requests were frantic enough to signal importance, but not so aggressive as to seem staged. The Spanish military didn't comply. Instead, Spanish officers with German sympathies quietly opened the briefcase. The letters were removed using thin steel rods, carefully rolled without breaking the wax seals or damaging the envelopes. The documents were photographed and the copies sent to German intelligence in Madrid. Within days, the information reached Berlin, and then the waiting continued. The British couldn't know for certain if the Germans had taken the bait until intelligence sources confirmed it. When the briefcase and letters were finally returned to the British on May 13th, Montague's team examined them under laboratory conditions. Microscopic inspection revealed that the envelopes had been opened. The wax seals showed evidence of tampering. The paper had been rolled. The Germans had seen everything. But had they believed it? On the 14th of May, 1943, Adolf Hitler met with Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. They discussed the Mediterranean theater and recent intelligence. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted and decrypted the communications. Hitler declared that the Allied invasion would not target Sicily. The intercepted message was clear. Greece was the primary objective. Sardinia would also be hit. Sicily was only a diversion. German forces were to be redeployed immediately. The 1st Panzer Division, an elite armored unit stationed in France, was ordered to Greece. 90,000 soldiers and their equipment pulled away from Western Europe. 7 infantry divisions in Italy were sent to Greece. Another 10 divisions were diverted to the Balkans. Sardinia's defenses were doubled, reinforced with additional aircraft and naval units. The Germans were splitting their forces, spreading defenses across multiple targets, exactly as the mincemeat plan had intended. A message was sent from Brigadier Leslie Hollis, Secretary to the Chiefs of Staff Committee, to Winston Churchill, who was in the United States at the time. It read, "Mincemeat swallowed rod. Line and sinker by the right people, and from the best information they look like, acting on it." Montagu continued the deception even after the operation's apparent success. On June 4th, Major William Martin's name appeared in the published casualty list in the Times. The listing was brief, formal, the kind of notice that appeared daily as the war ground on. By coincidence, 2 other officers who had died in a plane crash at sea were also listed that day. On the opposite page, there was a report that actor Leslie Howard had been shot down by the Luftwaffe over the Bay of Biscay. All of it lent credibility to the Martin story. A British officer, lost at sea, carrying classified documents. Just another casualty in a war full of them. The Spanish authorities buried the body on May 2nd in the Nuestra Señora de la Soledad cemetery in Huelva with full military honors. The headstone read, "William Martin, born 29 March 1907, died 24 April 1943. Beloved son of John Glyndwr Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales. The dates were invented, the parents were invented, the beloved son never existed.